How does a first generation parent raise a successful second gen kid? This is a huge problem that I have heard so many families struggle with. It's really important because when you are, let's say, the first generation to do something, follow the Lord or think differently about business or go to college or whatever the thing is, oftentimes your intuitions for what it's like to raise the second generation can be off because you don't know what their experience is like having grown up in your house. Maybe you grew up with parents that were less affluent, but your kids are growing up in an affluent house. Or your parents weren't following the Lord, but your kids are being raised in a house that does follow the Lord. And so your muscle memory, your context is growing up in a family that's very different than the kind of family your kids are growing up in. And so I think this is one of the reasons why second generation kids struggle so much. There's a famous proverb that says shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. The idea is that you have one generation that starts out relatively poor. That's what they mean by shirt sleeves, right? In the working class, trying to just make by, kind of subsistence living. They are able to create a lot of money, a lot of resources. This is just sort of like a financial proverb. They then raise a second generation kid, but because they struggled so much, they want to give their kids everything they didn't have. So they spoil Gen 2. Gen 2 grows up in all this affluence, and the first gen parents don't realize what they're doing to their second gen kid. And because of that, the second gen kid wastes the money, wastes the opportunity, and then you end up back to where you started in the third generation. Now, how do you solve this problem? Does the Bible have anything to say about this? And this is the reason why I think it's so useful, you guys, that we are studying a book of the Bible that actually has multiple generations in it. This is why I think the book of Genesis is so useful, to see 4 generations: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. You have these narratives about all these different kids that grow up in different environments, what it's like to be a first, a second, a third, and a fourth gen person. So Abraham was a first gen kid or a first gen man because his dad was an idol worshiper. So he grew up in a pagan household. Isaac is different. Isaac grew up in Abraham's household, right? His dad was much older. His mom was much older. They raised him in a environment in which they could fear the Lord. And so how do you deal with this? And this is the reason why I think one of the most important chapters in the whole Bible you can study to understand second gen kids is Genesis 26. Genesis 26 is actually one of the least familiar chapters in the Bible. When it comes to people studying the Bible, it's like people read it and they're like, what's going on here? It's like Isaac, he's digging a bunch of wells. He's making some kind of alliances with Abimelech. And, there's not a lot of like action. And so we don't really understand its power or its importance. But man, if you're listening to this and you are raising second gen kids, please study Genesis 26. Let's do that together. I want to read to you guys a little bit of what I kind of process this on my Substack as I'm writing through this book, The Ruling Household. And so I wanted to kind of walk through and interact with this problem, the second gen problem, and see what your guys' thoughts are about this. So this is how it starts. One of the least familiar chapters in the book of Genesis is chapter 26. It begins with Isaac claiming his wife is his sister to the Philistine king Abimelech, and then continues by describing the struggle Isaac faces trying to retake the wells dug by his father. But this chapter is far from a footnote in the story. We have in this chapter the key to understanding what it means to successfully establish the second generation of a multi-generational family line. So you can see these things he's going through, and it's interesting how he's repeating the mistakes of his father. So take a few minutes to read chapter 26 if you want to. If you're familiar with what goes on in that, most of you probably aren't. So I'd encourage you guys read or listen to that chapter. But I'm going to go a little bit deeper into it. I think, again, the key to really understanding second gen kids is there in Genesis 26. Okay. So here in this neglected chapter, you will find more insight into the challenges and opportunities of the second generation of a ruling household than anywhere else. Here's a cursory outline of what you can learn. First 2 verses, the second generation will be tested. And then you got the second generation will receive the family promises given to their forefathers. That's the next 3 verses. The second generation will be tempted in the same way as their fathers. That's the next 4 verses. The second generation will receive the family blessing. The second generation will be the object of envy by many. The second generation will need more room to steward their expanding resources. The second generation will have to secure their resources through violence or trust. So there's a dilemma that Isaac faces in this chapter. It's incredibly important. The second generation will eventually find enough space to expand. The second generation must choose to credit the Lord for their blessing. The second generation will make strategic alliances with other houses. The second generation will leave names behind to tell the family story to future generations. And the second generation will struggle to find the right spouses for their third generation kids. That's the way the actual chapter ends, with the challenge of finding a spouse for his oldest son, Esau. So it's really, I love this chapter. Again, there's so much here, and that's just a very cursory outline of what happens in these 35 verses. So in other words, it's not easy being the second generation. Far too many Western families choose to leave nothing to their children, thinking the best way to deal with the second generation challenge is to force everyone back into the first generation. That is the instinct of so many people, particularly boomers. They think, oh, well, if they need to face the same challenges I needed to face, they need to go through the same. We just need to hit the reset button every generation. There should be no continuity to this family line. There is no second generation. Everybody's first generation. That is not, in my opinion, the way to handle this. That is abdicating the responsibility of raising second-gen kids. So this may indeed sidestep some challenges, but it guarantees that a lasting ruling household will never develop. First-generation parents must become aware of the challenges that are unique to raising second-gen in order to prepare their children for what's coming. One encouragement from the story is that Isaac's track record here is mixed. He has some amazing successes in this chapter, but also a few failures, yet God stays faithful to him and the family through both. Throughout this story, the part that stands out to me and the thread that feels critical is the delicate relationship Isaac has with the wells dug by his father. On one hand, they belonged to his family, and it was his job and his privilege to possess and steward those wells. But they were also a trap for Isaac, and somehow this trap is one that Isaac handled with wisdom and grace. How can we prepare our second generation kids to deal wisely with the wells dug by the first generation? So these wells that Isaac is trying to figure out how to reestablish is kind of the essence of the plot of the story of this chapter. And this is why I think so many people don't understand the incredibly deep meaning of this story, because to us, they're like, what do these wells represent? And I think that's really what we need to tease out. So part of what we're seeing here is when you are a second gen, you're constantly running into the resources, the assets, the victories, the relationships, the wells dug by Gen 1. And so much of what you're dealing with is trying to steward that. And people are trying to take it from you. People think you're not worthy of it. You feel like an imposter. Like all these things are happening while you are trying to reacquire the wells of your father and establish those so that they can be passed on to Gen 3. And so this is the essence of the challenge that Isaac faces, particularly with how these wells are needing to be redug and reestablished, and the challenges that he's getting from all sides while he does this, and renaming these wells, telling the story of what he's going through as a Gen 2, trying to preserve what Gen 1 has already accomplished and then make their ceiling your floor. This is the challenge of Gen 2. Okay, what is the best tool in our culture for dealing with this? Let me walk through for us with our kids what we've really focused on to make sure that we were giving them appropriate amounts of challenge as Gen 2, but also giving them some of the advantages of being in Gen 2. This is a very challenging thing to try to get right. So I'll kind of walk through how we've thought about this. So perhaps the greatest test for any second generation descendant of a strong family is trust in God and not the pool of the family's resources. This is why the chapter begins with God confirming to Isaac his promise to Abraham's family. To your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham, your father. So he recapitulates this promise in verse 3 of chapter 26 to Isaac. Before the second generation can properly handle the family blessing, they must establish their own relationship with God and center their trust in him alone. Anything less than that will likely cause the second generation to trust their family over God. This is the test that second gen kids face that's so different than what first gen kids face. Every patriarch in Genesis had to go through this kind of journey. Abraham sojourned in Canaan. Isaac sojourns in the land of the Philistines. Jacob in Padan Aram, and Joseph in Egypt. It's in these foreign lands that they learn to put their trust in God. I think there's something about going on a journey to a foreign land that helps you get far enough distance from your family and really create this established relationship with God that the second gen needs. So where will your kids sojourn to learn to trust God? Each of our kids had to go on a journey away from the family in order to discover how to trust God. Kelsey went to Jerusalem, Jackson to South Africa, Sydney to Norway and South Korea, and the rest will go out as well, alone. Our kids came back from their journeys with a different kind of faith. I've noticed it can be difficult for parents who have invested in their kids intentionally through tools like homeschooling or working together, family adventures, to risk sending their kids out without family support. But the risks of not sending them out are much higher, though perhaps less obvious. You can be careful about where you send them and who you send them with, but they must be sent. The archer must shoot his arrows. And that's a reference, of course, to Psalm 127, that our kids are like arrows in the hands of a warrior. Another fear parents feel is that sending their single adult kids on a journey is giving into the nest idea of family, and their kids will never return. Our son sojourned for over 2 years, but he, like our daughters, was excited to return to the family when it was time to get married and start his own branch of the family. Until then, they were learning a lifestyle of radical trust in God through lonely travels and immersive missions. This process will test your own trust in God. Do you trust He will be faithful to your kids the way He was faithful to you? Then send them out and let them take this final step from childhood into adulthood. So I just want to personally say this was really hard for me in April to come to this conclusion and to realize our kids needed to have this kind of totally unique experience during the season of differentiation. So there's certainly a place or a time in their lives where they have to make their relationship with the Lord their own. This does not mean you have to reset every generation. This is not about starting back with Gen 1. This is about a season in the life of a child where they're becoming an adult and need to create that unique connection that they have with God. And so I'm a huge fan of doing this. You see a lot of wise cultures that have raised strong families. Two of the strongest family cultures in the world right now are Israeli families and Mormon families. And guess what? They both do this. So one of the things that's interesting about Israel, what we learned living there, was that within Israel, in Israeli culture, the thing that really binds them together, even more than their common religion, because a lot of them don't share that, is that they all serve in the IDF. And if you meet two people are meeting each other for the first time, they'll often say, well, where did you serve or what unit were you in? Because this is just a part of their culture. Women spend about 2 years in the IDF, men 3 years. It's compulsory. It's right out of high school. And so this creates a common cultural understanding and allows them to have this experience. If you've ever been around Mormon families, there's a very similar culture where they will often ask each other, where did you go on mission? Because they get sent out for a couple years, right, on these mission experiences where they're trained together, where they go overseas. And, sometimes these evangelistic efforts that they experience out there aren't necessarily super fruitful in terms of evangelism, but man, is it ever fruitful in driving their faith deeper and deeper and deeper in what they believe. I just think this is just a natural thing that we need our kids to go into. One of the things that I've been really frustrated with as Christians, we believe like we are possessing and really we understand the truth of God's word, but we're not nearly as intentional. We'll often send our kids into experiences that are in the most vulnerable times in their lives with people that have a agenda to try to destroy their faith. And so it's really important to begin to think as a Christian community, how do we help our kids go through this? And so we've investigated lots and lots of mission organizations that are very good at this, about training kids, discipling them, sending them out in groups in a way that's really healthy and helps them to have these immersive mission experiences that allow them to really learn to trust God in a powerful way. And so this is something I would really encourage you guys to consider, that especially that gap between high school and college. There's a year or two there that I think is incredibly valuable that you can begin to set your kids up for. And a second gen kid especially, I think, needs that experience of being sent out, fired. That arrow needs to be fired out. And it's not easy. It hurts shooting arrows, but you want to let your kids have that experience. One of the things that we did was everywhere our kids went overseas, when they were going through their discipleship phase, we would then go and visit them about 2 months in and just get an Airbnb and really kind of host their friends, help them to experience family continuity while they're in the midst of this experience. And so we want to give them some breaks and some reintegration. Also say, look, part of what you're doing is you're expanding our whole family's network. You're learning things that we didn't know. We want to learn from you. What are you learning? What is God teaching you? And who are you connecting with? And what are some, and we've made some amazing connections through our kids and through their mission experiences. And so this is such a valuable thing, not just for that child, but for the family and for people who are just freaking out that, oh my gosh, my kids are going to find somebody, they're going to get married, they're going to move like 8 states away or to a foreign country. Look, that could happen if God wants to take our kids to another country or whatever he wants to do. That is up to him. We are going to support our kids. They're still a part of our family team. We're going to do everything we can to create continuity for them and to support them. But our experience has been that when you have a really strong family culture and your kids get married and start having kids, man, do they ever want their kids, your grandkids, to grow up in proximity to that culture. So we've experienced that with our kids. And again, we don't want this to like root them here in some unhealthy way, but the fear that by allowing our kids to have a full experience and develop relationships and to have overseas experiences and to really connect with God in this way is actually going to be counterproductive to the family culture. Look, you should be much more worried about this 3-generation problem, right? Shirt sleeves of shirt sleeves in 3 generations. How do you know that you're not spoiling or ruining the second generation with your resources? How do you not destroy your kids through your success? These are problems that are far more common than parents understand. And so we want to figure out ways to do this really well and in skilled ways as family teams. And so I want you guys to hear a little bit about how Genesis 26, this amazing chapter about Isaac, how this can really help unpack the kinds of principles that I think are necessary for understanding how to raise a successful second generation.